All right, so what is groupers?
Yeah, buddy. Groupers. Well, it's a fish that lives in the sea, and it's big. It's a big bass fish.
All right,
It's also a
interview's over.
film.
Perfect.
It's also a film that I cobbled together, that I made, and I've been working on for over the last 3 years now, because that's how long these things take when you're doing so much of it, on your own. But it's a feature length film, and it's all about homophobia and bullying and group mentality. That's where the title comes from: group mentality, group thought, which kind of rubs me the wrong way, Mike. And the premise of the story is this. There's a young attractive woman in her early 20s who turns out she's in grad school, and she goes to a bar and picks up these two homophobic bully jocks that are like high school seniors, and she takes them home, and they think they're going home to have a threesome, but she's got other plans. She ends up overpowering them with a taser and tear gas in her van and knocks them out, and then they wake up at the bottom of an empty pool in an abandoned house, and they're strung together, facing one another, and she lets them know that the only way that they can get out of their predicament is if they choose to be gay for each other. They have to choose homosexuality in their circumstance. And there's a lot more to the story. It turns out that they were bullying her little brother for years in high school, who happens to be gay, and suggesting that homosexuality is a choice. And she gives them the opportunity to prove or disprove their theory.
Why did you pick this particular subject matter?
It all happened by a mistake. I've been writing for years and years and years towards, working towards making my first feature, which has been the lifelong dream. However, everything that I write is always at least $1 million to produce, and I'm not real good at schmoozing and rubbing elbows with Hollywood types. I never have been, so I wasn't sure how I was going to go about getting that kind of funding for a first-time filmmaker. But luckily, I was talking to some friends a few years ago about Chinese finger traps, and it just kind of occurred to me that I had not seen a Chinese finger trap in a long time. Have you seen a Chinese finger trap recently, Mike? Like, they just kind of disappear when you become an adult.
No, I haven't. Even in novelty shops, they're hard to come by now.
They're just hard, but when we were kids, like, they're everywhere. It seemed like they're always like in like party bags, and I don't know if they're the same ones are still circulating with the kids today. So I asked this question to a couple of my friends, and my one buddy immediately says, I don't know where they've gone, but I just thought of a great torture device if you put two penises in either side. And I said, that's ridiculous. That's an absurd thought that you have there. Mike Carano is my buddy's name. But then I thought about it for another instance, and I'm like, what if those two penises were connected to homophobic bullies, and the only way they could get out of said finger trap was to be aroused for one another? And I loved that idea, and we stopped talking about it at that very moment, and then that night I started writing it, and I knew I wanted to get two homophobic bullies in that predicament, and the only way they could get out was to choose to be gay for each other. And as absurd as that sounded, I thought that I could write an entire story around it where it would make sense and have some commentary and be thought-provoking and fun. It's obviously a comedy to begin with. So I did. And when I was on about page 30, I said, I can shoot most of this in one location and with limited cast, and I think I could actually raise the money for this thing. And I was off to the races.
Where did you shoot it? Where did you find a empty pool in someone's backyard?
Yeah, we found one pool, one house that actually fit our needs. I put my producer on it. That was one of the first things we did. And I live out here in LA, and there's still a lot of empty homes out here and a lot of foreclosures, and not as many as there used to be, but there's still there's a lot of houses in LA, and I thought that we'd find a ton of different houses to choose from, and we found one house that he had his house up on a site for this purpose, to shoot movies at, and it was the only one that actually came across our plate, and thank God it did, because I don't know, I would have had to move it to like a cabin in the woods or something. I would have had to change everything. But the problem with the house that we got is out in Glendale, up in the hills in Glendale, and the guy that we rented from, salt of the earth, really, really nice guy, but a bit of a hoarder. So this house was filled to the brim with everything, and the script called for an abandoned, empty house. So we spent a lot of time moving everything that he had in his living room, and he had like just his living room alone fit enough stuff that would fit in most people's houses, and we'd have to clear the whole thing out for a shot that would get in there, and then we'd have to clear out his entire bedroom for a shot that was. So it wasn't ideal, but the pool and the windows in the house, everything worked out the way that it was written in the script. Thank God.
The two gentlemen that you have tied up in the pool, kind of like by a system of bungee cords, how uncomfortable was for them to film each day?
Yeah, I felt really bad for them. We shot this thing over 14 days, and I had them in those ropes for about 10 of those 14 days, and I tried to make it as comfortable for them as possible. I had them sitting on apple boxes. I had cushions down. I didn't actually have their manhood in the Chinese finger traps at any point. We got creative with that. We didn't have to do that. There's a peen scene. It does get fairly sophomoric at times, a little over the top, but we didn't actually have anyone pee inside the Chinese dick trap, as we called it. And one of the guys got sick halfway through the shoot, so I felt really bad for him. But they were troopers. These guys were, everyone that was on this set was, they got the vision, they saw what I was going for, and they gave me their all. So I was really, really lucky.
How'd you go about casting your leads?
Oh, arduous process, because it's not like when you're making a small movie, it's not like you get to just go, pick actors that you're familiar with that you think would be great for the roles. You got to, start from scratch, really. So I used 3 casting sites and submitted, and since it was for like lead roles in a feature film that was paying money, I had thousands and thousands and thousands of submissions, and I looked through thousands and thousands of submissions, and then you pare it down to the people that you see video clips of that you think might work, and then you do auditions. And we used Cast Studios. For those of you who are thinking about maybe making movies out here, even for shorts, I've used Cast Studios, CAZT, and it's great. It's free for the filmmakers, and you can set up auditions there, and you record them all, and it was a really fun process. I love the casting process.
For the casting notice that you put out there, did you specifically put that that at least 2 of the leads would be
no
face for most of the time?
No, I didn't give them any idea, and it was kind of funny too, because when you do sides for auditions, and you just give them 2 or 3 to 5 pages from the script, and the sides that I gave for the 2 boys that were going to be in this predicament, I didn't let on with the portion of the script that I made available to them to let them know exactly what they were getting in for. So when I did land on the 2 homophobic jocks for my leads, it was Pete and Cameron are their names. They're like such sweet guys too. They're so different from the dicks that they're playing in this movie. I let them know that I said, good news, bad news. Good news, you got the part if you want it. Bad news is here's what it entails, and it's pretty out there, and you might want to talk to like your family about it before signing on. And they both did. They said, okay, let me get back to you. And they both talked to their parents and let them know that they got cast in a feature film, but they were going to be portrayed as evil homophobic bullies, and that their penises were going to be suggested to be inside a Chinese finger trap for much of the movie. And they got back to me, and they're like, oh, yeah, they're cool with it. Everything's good. Let's do this. So there was that. I was prepared for one of them to say, yeah, you know what? I don't want to be thought of as the dick trap guy. So, but that didn't happen.
When you've had this film screened in front of people, what have been the reactions?
People are laughing at the right places, and I've screened it probably close to 20 times now, because I 4-walled it for a lot of the people that gave to the project all over the country last year. And it's funny because I was really concerned about the gay community, which I really had them in mind when I was writing this movie and making this movie. And I screened it up in the Tenderloin up in San Francisco last year. And I can tell you that it was by far and away the best reaction I got from any audience was from that screening that I did in San Francisco, which was predominantly a gay turnout. And I was thrilled to get their approval on this movie, because the last thing I wanted to do was offend the gay community, when so much of the themes in this movie are about their plight and what they're going through, even today, especially today with some of the laws that are being bandied about and whatnot. It's getting absurd. So I was really worried about stepping on toes there, and was thrilled, like I said, to come out the other end and have them embrace it.
Was there any specific feedback that you got back from the LGBT community about this movie?
Yeah, the one thing that I was most concerned about is, okay, so in the center of this movie is this gay brother who I mentioned earlier when I was talking about the plot, who gets picked on by these two bullies. And I think most writers probably would have been more careful than I was with his character and made him more of a sympathetic victim. And I didn't want to do that, because if I did that, this movie would have been preachy, and I really didn't want to make a preachy movie. I don't respond well to preachy movies, and I made his character somewhat despicable and a pain in the ass. So I was afraid that the gay community might have been looking for somebody who's a bit more of a sympathetic victim that could come out on the other side, standing high and proud. But that's not who I wrote. But they were fine with it, because most of the gay guys that I talked to and lesbians up in San Francisco, they said we're tired of being shown as victims, and there are gay guys like your character in the movie that we all dislike because they flaunt their this almost to as a bully pulpit themselves, which is what I did with that character. So that was some of the positive feedback I got. And honestly, no one gave me any negative feedback, but maybe that's because I'm standing there, and people like to give negative feedback on social media, but not to people's faces. So didn't get any negative feedback in person.
When and where will people be able to watch the movie?
So yeah, it's getting a theatrical release here in LA for a full week run at the Beverly Hills Laemmle Music Hall starting September 27th, and it'll be screening there for a full week. And then we're doing like a one night only type event in 5 cities if we meet the thresholds for tickets sold, and we're getting pretty close on a couple of those. That'll be New York, San Francisco again, Atlanta, Chicago, and Washington, D.C. And you need to get a ticket for those screenings by September 23rd or 24th, depending on which theater. And what happens there is you buy the ticket, and you don't get charged unless the movie's a go. And that would be October 1st at 7:30 in those 5 cities. And if your city meets the threshold, looks like Chicago and Washington, D.C. will meet that threshold. So it'd be great. And they're playing at like big, nice, beautiful, like AMC type theaters, landmark theaters. So it'd be great to have you guys come out and check it out before it hits the platforms, which will be sometime before the holidays.